Now let me show you how his imagination was really dramatically illustrated. We always associate Lincoln, do we not, with the Civil War, with knitting back together North and South and being willing to fight for that. But it's not just a North-South thing that Lincoln is talking about. He's also talking about an East-West thing. This is his vision. He sees the United States better than most people of his generation becoming not just a continental power, but a global power. It is Abraham Lincoln, is one of the handful of people before 1865 that sees the United States becoming the most powerful nation in the world. That takes imagination because it hadn't existed yet. You have to be able to project what that means. And he knew that for that to happen, there couldn't be slavery. That would be just the most ultimate violation. If slavery kept expanding with the country, that would be the most ultimate violation of our principles. He knew that we would have to have tariff-free commerce from east to west, north to south. He knew that we would have to have a strong manufacturing base where we would have the economic strength. He also knew that we would have to provide free land for all of these settlers coming into this country. He knew that every immigrant group that came to the United States ended up within a generation better off than where it had come from. Within a generation, the immigrants who came to the United States were doing better than where they had come from. Ladies and gentlemen, that's why they had immigrated, where they came from. They were the third sons, the fourth daughters of families. They didn't enjoy, if they were third, fourth, fifth sons, they did not enjoy the laws of primogeniture where, the firstborn son would get all of the wealth. And these were considered the dregs of society, the dregs back in Europe, the dregs in Asia. And they came to this country, and within a generation, they had the opportunity to give their kids a better life. Lincoln saw that. He perceived very clearly the potential of this country. If we had a country that was knit not just north and south, put the United States back together after that dreadful Civil War, but east and west, so that we'd be able to function as a healthy democracy that was true to its principles, growing economically, and amassing enough strength to become the world's greatest moral and material power. Lincoln had that vision, and that's a vision that will get you up out of bed in the morning. That's huge. It's just huge. One of the handful of human beings who really saw the potential of this country and why it was important. Now you understand why it was important, he said. It's very controversial now when we hear about it, but why he said in his first inaugural address, I will respect the fact that slavery exists in the South, but I will not tolerate it expanding to the West. But in that first inaugural address, he says, I will respect slavery if it means we can stay unified. That's the most important thing. If we're going to have this march to become a great moral and material nation, the greatest ever on the face of the earth, we've got to make sure that we stay unified. Slavery will be abolished. It will disappear. That was his position. So he had imagination, he had vision of what this country have, and that's something that's very important for leaders. A fourth quality you're going to notice about leaders, their character. One of the greatest opportunities that I ever had was I was given the access to President Ford in Vail, Colorado in August 2005. I was the last person who conducted a series of interviews with President Ford. There were a couple of people who saw him after I did for single interviews, but I was the last one to have a series of interviews with him in his study, in his home. And I asked President Ford, what's the most important quality of leadership to you? After all your years, here's a guy who's in his 90s and he's reflecting on leaders, and I'm asking him to share with me his wisdom. And he said, character. And he added trust. He said, people need to have a strong character to be leaders. They need to be able to inspire trust. That's what I started with, isn't it? Let's look at the strong character component here. Let's look at Lincoln just a little bit more as an example of that. The way I like to teach Lincoln is not just that here's a guy who overcame material poverty. Again, you're familiar with the story. We just rehearsed it. You know, though, the dirt poor conditions, literally dirt floor cabin on the frontier, poor even amid poverty. You know his poverty. You know that to overcome those kinds of conditions takes a strong character. But you know what Lincoln really had to overcome that was worse than material poverty? There are things worse than material poverty. It's emotional poverty. It's somebody who has experienced a great deal of rejection and death and loss. Emotional poverty is something that plagued Lincoln from early in his life, made him prone to terrible depression, bouts of depression. Let me tell you a little bit about his emotional poverty. When he was just a 9-year-old kid, his mom dies. He watches her, he's stuck with her in a, I mean, we're talking about a cabin. Has anybody seen the cabin of his boyhood? There are several of them, but this one would be in Indiana, southern Indiana. And they're stuck together in this little bitty room that would probably about be the space of just these tables over. Okay, I mean, this would be a generous sized cabin on the frontier for the kids, the parents, the extended family who would come and visit. We're talking about something smaller than your rooms, probably your dorm rooms or your apartments. Certainly no bigger. He had to be with his mom while she died, spent a week dying an agonizing death. It wasn't any of this, you know how Americans have sanitized death? We take people off to nursing homes where they can die out of sight. We take people off to the hospital. We put them in hospice situations. We load them up with morphine. We do a lot of things as palliatives to help them and to help those of us who've got to survive dying. Ladies and gentlemen, on the frontier, you didn't have palliatives. If somebody was going to die an agonizing death and there was no doctor in the neighborhood, well, death's ugly. And his mother got this milkweed infection, or milk sickness, and it is just apparently, from the descriptions I've read, where doctors have gone back and they have talked about what the symptoms would have been that Lincoln would have observed in his mom. It really is horrifying. It's the kind of sickness where you writhe, your tongue swells, your eyes roll, you sweat, you hallucinate. It was very, very disturbing for this young boy, this 9-year-old, to watch the woman who had brought him into the world leave this world that way. And he helped his dad after her death actually construct the coffin. And somebody observed that he just sort of went into himself to survive. He just mechanically, carved and shaped and, went into his own head. Other people died who were very close to him early on. He was very estranged from his father. He had a terrible relationship with his father. Now think of this. This poor little kid, his mom dies, and now his dad is always on his case. This is part of the emotional poverty. Always on his case because Abraham Lincoln wants to read instead of be a farmer. Abraham Lincoln wants to improve his mind more than improve the earth. He just knows that he's not farming stock. It's just something he's born with. And his father's rejection of him and his criticism of him and his beating of him certainly made Lincoln feel less worthy or I should say, less likely to pursue the course that his father set out for him.